What is the extent of the chaos in Trump world this week? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to this week's Libertarian Angle, the show that y'all know brings you the principled case for the free society. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, who I'm sure most of you know, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
It's good to see you and to be with our viewers and listeners who have kindly joined us.
Yeah, so Richard, we've had about, a week of President Trump, and
Yes.
this is an exciting week, Richard, because I don't think I've ever seen so much chaos in such a short period of time. I mean, there is just so much to focus on that Trump has given us to talk about in just a week that is absolutely fascinating. I mean, let me touch on a few of the things in Trump world here, and then we can analyze them and look at them and develop them more closely. But um, Trump just got into a fight this week with the president of Colombia because Trump is using the military. That's another big thing that we can focus on. He's sending the military in a big way. I mean, he had sent the military back when he was president to the border, and Biden had sent some troops down. But the reports are that he's already contemplating like 20,000 troops to the border. And so the troops were helping out. The military was helping out, taking migrants to Colombia in military transport planes, and according to the press, had them handcuffed, wouldn't let them go to the bathroom, was essentially treating them like prisoners of war. And so the Colombian president says, "You're not going to treat our people without respect, without dignity, and we're not going to let these military planes land here." So Trump says, "All right, that's the way you want to be. I'm hitting you with a 25% tariff, and I'm going to raise it up to 50%." And the Colombian president stood his ground for a while. He said, "I'll hit you with the tariffs too in retaliation." And then Trump called him a socialist. And the guy says, "Thank you," because the guy is a socialist. So, but ultimately, the guy backed down. He realized that discretion was the better part of valor. And then you've got what article that you referred to me, that in the Washington Post today, where Trump is putting quotas on the number of people to be rounded up by ICE agents or Homeland Security or whatever, that he's not happy that they're only doing a few hundred a day or something. So he's putting quotas on there. I want this increased to 1,000. And of course, the question arises is whether he's going to start offering rewards for every illegal you find. We'll give you X amount of money. Or snitches. I would think that that's another thing, is offer bounties for snitches that turn people in. All right, so what else do we have? Richard, we got this exchange with the Prime Minister of Denmark over Greenland, that Trump says this is going to be our land, like it or not. And the Prime Minister says, "I don't think so." So Trump's threatening them, I presume, with sanctions or tariffs or whatever. You've got the situation in Panama, where Trump is again talking about tariffs and taking control over the Panama Canal. You've got the Mexican situation where he's threatened 25% tariffs on Mexico if it keeps letting immigrants reach the border and cross into the United States, or drugs or whatever. Oh yeah, he also said that he was decreeing. This is all by decree, by the way. He's Congress is like out of the picture on this stuff, and so is the Supreme Court. Uh, but he said, what did he say? Uh, that he's going to take the drug cartels and convert them by decree into terrorist organizations. I mean, he just does it by decree. And then that, of course, then makes all the tools in the war on terrorism, USA Patriot Act, the FISA court, the warrantless searches, the surveillance state, everything that they use on the war on terrorism, assassinations, state-sponsored assassinations, torture, indefinite detention, is now crossing over into the drug war. And and bombing. I mean, now he can go bomb terrorists because that's the U.S. can bomb terrorists anywhere in the world because it's a global war on terrorism. Uh, so here we got this week. I mean, I may be missing something here, Richard, that you can add, but this is quite a week of chaos. What do you think?
Well, I think that we should ask the question, if let's suppose we were talking about a foreign leader, and suppose that a foreign leader on his own announces that he wants to seize the territories of neighboring countries. Let's suppose that on his own, he said that he was using the military to suppress those in the country that he viewed as a threat to the integrity, safety, and security of the nation. Let us suppose that such a foreign president on his own uh, uh, proceeded to issue pardons left, right, and center of people that he thinks have been wronged, regardless of whether a more judicious approach and a more legal approach would raise flags and raise questions. Let us suppose that a foreign dictator proceeded to implicitly spend huge sums of money out of the military and domestic dollars uh, without any congressional approval or parliamentary approval, depending upon the system they have. What would we say about such an individual who just said, I have the power to decree, to declare, to impose, to enact without anyone's approval? Well, I hate to tell you this, but the word that would come to most people's minds if they were watching a foreign leader do this is an arrogant dictatorial authoritarian. Now, Trump has a lot of authority with executive orders and presidential authority to do a wide latitude of things. And the blame can be placed at the foot of previous Congresses and the assertions of prior presidents that have, by omission or default or congressional approval, uh, sanctioned these types of authorities in the hands of the chief executive, the president. But it doesn't change the fact that Trump has grabbed onto this authority with enthusiasm, with exaltation of his ability to dictate how things will be done in the United States. This one that you alluded to, which is in an article in today's, that is Monday's Washington Post this morning, I read it, uh, is that ICE offices around the country have been accused of being too tardy and lackadaisical in the number of illegal immigrants, defined as the first round as criminals, murders, child traffickers, and so on. The type of people who none of us would obviously want next door to our house, looking at our own kids, and so therefore it diminishes people's anxiety or disapproval or disagreement with these acts by saying, well, who would want these kind of people on the streets anyway, whether they were foreign or domestic? They're lackadaisical in rounding up these people, so that now the Post reported that they are implicitly imposing quotas, not just monthly quotas, but daily quotas of up to 1,500 people a day, a day. Now, let us suppose that there are questionable people who have been in the legal system over and over times, gotten out on a technicality, or just been booted out with a short sentence, and they're rotten people. Okay. I'm just using their benchmark, okay, just their benchmark of the first round. The people who you wouldn't want to date your daughter. Okay, fine. How many of those are there? And if you just do these sweeps to keep your numbers up each day, how are numerous people not in this category, even your own definition of the category, not going to be swallowed up in the net? And oh my gosh, we're 14 people short of our 1,500 for the day. Well, we'll just count them anyway and move them around in the system and boot them out. Now, I would just like to make a certain historical observation. There is an instance in 20th century history in which there was a government that gave regions of its nation, quotas to round people up. Round people up in two categories. What was called the first category, that is a quota to round up people who are to be executed as enemies of the people. And another quota, in the second degree, it was called, to round people up to meet a quota to be sent to slave labor camps. And that was Stalin's Soviet Union of the 1930s. As part of the Central Plan, they had central plans for regions in the Soviet Union obligated to find people who were enemies of the people who deserved to be killed. Did you meet your quota of killing people, of enemies of the state? Did you meet your quota of people to round up, to send to the Gulag camps, the slave labor camps of Siberia and Central Asia, to be the slave labor to serve the 5-year plans? Now that is what went on. We're shocked by this. But are we shocked when a president and those who are responsible to him give orders for policing authority, and ICE is a policing authority, to just round people up to meet a quota and to see that your numbers match what is required each day so as not to get into trouble? And how are you not going to be focused on the number and not the legitimacy, even by their standards of who's supposed to be rounded up, of who you get in the net? This is disastrous. This is disastrous. And to the extent that this becomes accepted by the population, then having done this once, the net can be stretched wider and wider and wider and wider until there's no end to this. What if the president decides there's a quota of domestics who deal in fentanyl, or domestics who are child traffickers? Are they supposed, as the FBI now, to have quotas to round people up just to meet the quota? That too is the madness of a central plan of the most crude Soviet type. That is just one instance of this. And, America has usually claimed, okay, there's a difference between theory and practice, but has usually claimed that it stands for freedom around the world, that it believes that people should determine their own destinies and their own futures, and that aggression, conquest is illegitimate from an ethical point of view because, quote, the people themselves should decide under the government under which they wish to live. Now, what is Donald Trump saying? In the name of our national security, we need Greenland. Now, is he asking for a plebiscite or a referendum in Denmark? Because Denmark is the political authority who has jurisdiction over Denmark and has for centuries? Has he called for a referendum or a plebiscite in Greenland itself and its total population of only 57,000 people approximately, to determine, do they want to remain part of Denmark, become part of the United States, or just be an independent nation? And there is a strong independence movement there. The only thing that's making them reluctant is they get approximately $500 million a year subsidy from the government in Copenhagen. And they don't know how the hell they're going to cover their own expenses if they lose the government subsidy from Denmark. It's the only reason they haven't voted independence yet. We need someone else's money to live on. But the fact is that now Trump has said, because I have decided that this is a territory in the national interest of the United States, I will get it one way or another. Economic sanctions and pressures, or even he's not taken off the table military activity. Well, then how does he or any other American official government respond when China says, for decades you've said that, we shouldn't bother with Taiwan? Why? We view it as part of our national identity, part of our territory, our national security. So when we decide to take Taiwan by force, Mr. Trump, stay in your own lane. Or why can't Putin say, look here, Ukraine is part of the Soviet national security orbit. And whether it be all of Ukraine or the part we've already occupied, this is legitimate serving of our national interest. Who are you to tell us it's not, Mr. Trump? Are we to now tell you what is in your national interest in your own backyard? So this explodes the entire aura, the entire outward appearance of America standing for liberty. Even its rhetoric is gone, regardless of the practice of the United States. Now they don't even have the rhetoric to portray around the world anymore. Because Trump is saying it's power and desire of what was viewed as in national interest as the king is defining it. So this is part of what he has been doing during just this first week in domestic and international affairs. And chaos, believe me, because nobody around the world knows what the hell is going on and what new direction is going to take. And for trade, for social actions, for cultural development, for economic investment and betterment, you need a calmer political environment than that. And all Trump is doing is creating instability, chaos, and uncertainty that is going to be damaging not only to other parts of the world, but is going to rebound backwards to the harm of the average American as the economic and social environment of the country is thrown into total disruption.
Yeah. And as people, get wind of what he's doing with his threats and his bluster, nobody likes that. Nobody ever likes a bully. And a bully may get by with it for a while, but as soon as things start going south, like if America were in an economic crisis or whatever, there'd be a lot of people gloating and very happy over it. And when you were talking about the number of people that they're rounding up and these quotas, I was thinking of Vietnam, where they had the body counts. Everything was, how many did you kill today? How many did you kill today? And as long
Yes.
as the body counts were up there, nothing else mattered, whether they were winning the war or not winning the war or whatever. Everything was just the body counts. And I thought of that when you said, that it's always how many are you arresting for deportation? And Richard, there's a lot of fear across this country. Uh, the fear is pervasive, and it's not just among the illegal immigrants. I mean, it is there, obviously. I mean, many of these people have been here for years. Their children are American citizens. Oftentimes, they could get arrested on the street, put in a van, and immediately put on a military transport and shipped back home without ever being able to say goodbye to their families. Um, and there's also fear among American citizens of Hispanic descent because oftentimes it's hard to distinguish between a Mexican and a Mexican American by just looking at them. And so people who are American citizens are nervous as too because they got to carry their papers with them. They don't have their identification with them to prove that they're an American citizen. You think the military is going to care? You think ICE is going to care about deporting them? And I saw this once when I was leaving my hometown of Laredo. As you know, I grew up in Laredo, spent about, almost half my life there, over 30 years. And I was flying out of there, and you had to go not only through, the security stuff, TSA stuff, but also through Border Patrol, immigration. And so I was sitting next to this guy on the plane. He was Mexican American, and I said, what do you think of this kind of thing going through, an immigration checkpoint when we've never entered Mexico? We're flying out of an American city and we're going through immigration. And he says, hey, every time he was a native Laredo and he lived in Dallas. He says, every time I fly out of here, I dress up, I carry my passport because I'm scared to death that they're going to detain me and I'm not going to catch my flight. I mean, that's what it's like to live under this kind of regime. And I don't know if you heard it. I mean, we're talking about chaos here, about that bishop at the National Cathedral where they had the special Sunday service that the president attended along with the vice president. This bishop is a woman. I think she's Presbyterian. So she looks, I don't know if Trump's in the front row, but he's near the front row, and if not in it. And she's got a lot of guts. She looks at him and says, let's talk about mercy, Mr. President. Can you, and he didn't say Mr. President, but I think she was looking at him and saying, we need to talk about mercy, the mercy for these immigrants that are here. And I mean, this is a church service, Richard. What's wrong with talking about mercy in a church service? So Trump leaves there with Vance, the vice president, and they made a remark bad mouthing her, like she's some radical leftist. Can you believe she had the audacity to talk like that to us? And I'm sitting there saying, wait a minute, this is a church. Why is it bad to talk about mercy in a church? And that's one of the things that I found so phenomenal. There's people cheering this on, this massive suffering they're inflicting on people with these arrests and raids and deportations. There's a lot of suffering going on here. And there's people that go to church every Sunday with wear their religion on their sleeves, and they praise the Lord, Jacob, praise the Lord. I'm going to church, fellowship of man, fellowship of man. And if you ask them, well, what are y'all talking about in church this Sunday? Oh, we're going to talk about God's second greatest commandment: Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And Jacob, I love my next door neighbor, and that's what Jesus was talking about, my next door neighbor. And then on Monday morning, get rid of those people, man. They're just bad people. Inflict suffering on them. And I mean, I find it fascinating, Richard. The contradiction is so manifest. That a nation that prides itself on Judeo-Christian principles is doing this and reveling in it. It's amazing to me.
Yeah, the other thing, if I can just go about this idea of quotas on rounding people up, is that one of the things that became infamous in the 1930s, whether it was in Nazi Germany or one of the other authoritarian countries in Central and Eastern Europe, or certainly the Soviet Union, is that nobody wanted to leave their home without their papers. Because at any time, the regular police or the secret police could stop you and and ask for your documents to prove who you were, where you lived, and that you had a legitimate role in the society, or you could demonstrate that you were not an enemy or a criminal, without which you could be subject to arrest and imprisonment. And if you could not present those documents, you were gone. In fact, it became notorious that because of those rounding up for sending people to the Gulag quotas in the Soviet Union in the 1930s, that if someone, they would just roam the streets looking for bodies to pick up, right? The quota. And if they stopped you and you didn't have your internal documents, and every Soviet citizen had to have an internal passport with them, not just the passport you would have on you if you travel abroad. Everyone had an internal passport. If you did not have that internal passport on your person, you were gone. You were gone to meet that quota. And your relatives, your friends may very well never know what had happened to you. You're just gone. Now, that type of mentality, that type of system, that type of set of perverse incentives is extremely dangerous to cultivate or praise or be enthusiastic about. Because the point is, as the phrase goes, they first came for him, and then they came for him. And when they came for me, nobody was left to protest.
Yeah, you reminded me of the trip I took to Cuba many years ago, and I took a taxi down to a little town called Trinidad, which was about, I don't know, 6 hour taxi ride. And I got there, there was no hotel, but people would rent rooms in their houses. So I knocked on this lady's door and said, do you have a room? And she said, yeah. And so she came in and she said, I need to see your passport. And I looked and I said, shoot, I'd forgotten it in my hotel safe back in Havana. And she was terrified. She says, I can't rent you a room. I mean, you could see the fear was palpable. And she says, like, what are you going to do? I said, what do you mean what I'm going to do? She says, you can't go back in a taxi. We have checkpoints on the highways here. She says, if you don't have your passport, they will take you to jail. You will spend the time in jail till you're able to get free out of there. Well, those are the same kind of checkpoints we have in the Southwest that people consider part and parcel of a free society. And finally, I was able to get out of there by going to the airport and distracting the ticket counter. I mean, the ticket guy, by bringing up the baseball game that was going to take place between Cuba and the United States. And I said, "Hey, who you cheering for?" And he goes, "Oh, Cuba, of course." He says, "How about you?" I said, "I'm rooting for Cuba too." And it got him all distracted. He gave me my ticket, never asked for my passport. But that's what you're talking about. This is what goes on in a totalitarian country. You have to have your papers, and they're part and parcel of an immigration control system. This is what people don't realize, that when you have this kind of system, it's not just a control on the immigrant, it's a control on the citizenry. Because in order to vet who's a citizen and who's not. You have to have the citizens have their papers. How else are you going to tell the difference? And so you end up having these controls, like they're raiding these private businesses, Richard, to get these quotas, like a restaurant. They're going in there with fully armed, and they lock all the doors without a warrant, no search warrant, lock all the doors so there's no means of escape, and they start asking questions of each person in there, especially on the staff. And of course, if you're dark skinned or you speak with an accent, you better have your papers. And that's how they're meeting these quotas. If you don't have your papers, they got the van right there for you. But it's a control on the business. It's interrupting the customers that are there eating. This is like a raid in a totalitarian country where there's pervasive fear in the farming industry, the restaurant industry. I guarantee you, when you see this kind of fear sweeping across the society, you're not talking about a free and prosperous and harmonious society. You're talking about a society in which totalitarian measures are being taken.
Yeah. The the dangers I was suggesting is when this type of system becomes just taken for granted, when it no longer has shock value, when it no longer seems to be the exception to the rule, because of some in people's minds, well, it's just criminals and drug traffickers and child molesters, uh, and then it's just presumed, well, it's anyone who is undesirable, where undesirable becomes an amorphous term to cover anything that those in political power want to do with it in terms of categorizing groups or individuals to be covered by that heading. And this is a dangerous path to be going on. Um, for the last 8 years, the Democrats, the leftists, have used a rhetoric against Trump that got on a lot of people's nerves, particularly conservatives and Trump supporters. He's a dictator. He's a fascist. Well, one does not have to agree with the agenda of those on the left to then question whether Trump does not have some of the characteristics and the behavior of those that are traditionally viewed as authoritarian and dictatorial. And quite separate from the left having their own agenda in using this rhetoric, objectively, this is how Trump is acting. And it should be opposed and resisted and challenged by anyone, not just classical liberals or libertarians in the narrow sense, but anyone who has any desire to preserve the vestiges of a constitutional limited government based upon the Bill of Rights and the sanctity and respect and protections of the rights of the individual.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because look what he's doing with tariffs. I mean, what's a tariff? A tariff is a sales tax. That's all it is. It's a sales tax on imported goods. Who's paying that sales tax when they buy an imported good? It's the American people. So this guy is saying, I have the authority to raise taxes on the American people. 25% tax you are going to pay. Well, Richard, to me, in a republic or a democracy with divisions of powers and branches of government, it's the legislative branch that decides the taxes, and the executive branch enforces that. But this guy is doing the legislative job. He's saying, I will set the taxes when it comes to tariffs. I can set whatever I want, 50% sales tax. It's absolutely remarkable in terms of dictatorial power. It's like shocking. And then I think it's also worth mentioning the military. He is consolidating power in the military, and he's militarizing the border. In other words, the system, he's acknowledging that the immigration control system cannot work. It does not work without the military. If it could work without the military, he would make it work. He'd just say, hey, Border Patrol, I want you to seal the border. He's acknowledging that the system cannot work, which I've been saying for 36 years. You've been saying it. The system has never worked for 80, 90 years. It's never worked. It's always just produced planned chaos. He's acknowledging that with a military intervention, but it's a very dangerous thing. They're setting up detention centers. encampments to put all these people. They're consolidating with the war on terrorism. That means they've got Homeland Security involved in this, the DEA, the military. He's wanting the CIA to get involved. If I'm not mistaken, either that or in the drug war. uh, this is dangerous stuff because I'm not saying that all of a sudden it's going to happen tomorrow, but you have a real emergency. He's declared a national emergency down there, which is just ludicrous. It's just a ploy to acquire totalitarian like powers. But let's assume a real emergency, like a war breaks out with China or Russia, and then there's an economic collapse at the same time with $36 trillion in debt, and there's a major crash here. All of a sudden, you're talking about a national emergency domestically, and you've got this omnipotent military intelligence establishment. It's time that people go back and see what Eisenhower said in that farewell address, that this apparatus is a real danger to our rights and liberties and democratic processes in this country. And if anybody thinks that you can militarize a border to such an extent that you seal it, like North Korea, and that's not going to affect the rest of the country, they're living in la la land.
Well, the other element to this is if whether it is sending the military to the border or air flights with military aircraft to deport large numbers of people to other countries, or the sweeps that ICE has been doing and is expected to accelerate in doing. Where the hell does all this money come from? Is there an authorization to send 20,000 soldiers to the border to do particular activities? Uh, is there an appropriation that Congress has made to pay for the jet fuel or just the regular propeller fuel to deport people at the cost of what? I have no idea what a flight to Colombia must cost one of those military aircraft. I mean, or the additional expenditures to now accelerate the roundups of illegals around the country. Who appropriated this money? This, as you were saying, the purse string is supposed to be in the hands of Congress, and very specifically. But Trump obviously believes that he has unlimited authority to spend other people's money, and if necessary, increase the debt to see that every dollar he needs is in his hands to do so.
Yeah. And what's sad and pathetic is you've got large numbers of Americans cheering him on, cheering the destruction of their very own rights and liberty. That to me is just pathetic and sad, Richard, when people are cheering the loss and the sacrifice of their own liberty.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there is a major television network now that almost with euphoric exhilaration begins all of their newscasts on all the wonderful thing that Trump is doing, which at the end of the day is threatening our own liberty.
Yeah. All right. On that bright note, we'll wrap things up. As always, enjoyed the conversation with you, Richard. Thank you all for tuning in, and thank you for your great support of FFF so that we can continue doing Libertarian Angle and the other things we do to bring this country in a different direction, a direction of liberty and peace, prosperity and harmony with the people of the world. Thank you.